Hello, my name is Tykara Carter. Alongside me today are Alex, Lydia, and Mary. Today we will be interviewing Richard Falco, better known these days as Professor Falco. He is the president of the Vision Project, coordinator of multimedia journalism in the Master's in Communication program here at Sacred Heart University. Now we will hop right into the interview with Alex taking off.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So tell me about your early education. Where did you go? What was your major?
Well, actually, I was stumbling about at schools and universities trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I actually took a course in photography thinking like, oh, that could be fun. And something clicked. And when it did, I realized that this is something that I wanted to explore more. And then began to study and actually ended up becoming a photo major with a strong background in history.
Oh, nice. So what was the point in which you realized you wanted to do photojournalism? It was in that class?
No. At that time, I was exploring photography. I think what was happening is I came back into New York and I was then trying to figure out what I wanted to do in terms of direction. And I'd become aware of a number of photographers, particularly the work of Eugene Smith, which influenced me tremendously. And that documentary style led to me trying to look for a project to do, and I discovered I could get access to Bellevue Hospital's emergency ward to do a large story. Mm-hmm. And I ended up spending about 6 months there documenting their trauma unit, and that was the beginning of the focus on documentary work. After that, it just kind of progressed.
So how did you get your start in transition from college to a career path?
Well, once I did that documentary, then I was able to shop it out, so to speak, to both magazines and, more importantly, at the time, the way the business of news worked is that you needed to find an agent that represented you. Once I had that, what also happened is that the city of New York came to me to do a story on paramedics. They wanted the entire scope of emergency care from the street into the hospital. And what they did is they got grant money when they went to Senator Kennedy's office and got a federal grant so that I could do the documentary on the emergency medical services. That led to the ability to publish the book, which launched me into a career which got me an agency commitment, and I became a contract photographer with Black Star, which was
awesome.
A major premier agency at the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So out of all the stuff you've done in your career, what was the most memorable gig that you had?
That's hard to say at this point. I've been doing this a very long time, and I think what happens is you do so many things, they all have their own special meaning and love and connection depending on what you're doing. I think there is probably 100 that I could talk to you about. And maybe one of the things we should go back and do is to kind of look at some of the things related to stuff which was done throughout my career and how it developed. And I think it begins with the fact that I started to see myself focusing in two areas. One, hardcore documentary, where you're literally looking at the news and figuring out where it's going. And one of the stories I thought we could look at and talk about is Sub-Saharan Africa, where I was focusing on the refugee issues and the drought and famine and war that's constantly ripping that continent apart. And here is how it kind of worked, because what you would do is your agent would then get you a commitment with a magazine, and I was working, I think, with Newsweek with this. We were then syndicating that content to different magazines throughout Europe and Asia, and plus we were working with a lot of nonprofit groups like Save the Children. And this is how the business of news began to be connected with content and content distribution. So what we would do is we'd go in, spend a lot of time there, figure out where we wanted to go, and then move that content out through the network of agencies. Okay, the next thing is that one of the things that I wanted to also do is to focus on more cultural programs. And again, how it also worked in terms of the business. The luxury of working with a major agency at the time was that if you couldn't find a commitment to a specific magazine, the agency then would come and put up the money for me to create it and hold it against my royalties later on. And that's the way we did a lot of projects. Because often I didn't want to do just what was happening in the news. I had things that I was interested in and I wanted to explore them. And the only way to do that was to me find the story, get people to back the story, and then go shoot the story.
Gotcha.
Let's transition over to the occurrence at 9/11.
Okay.
How did you get into the site? Because I remember you telling us about the press and how.
Okay. Well, first of all, there's a lot of things going on. As a New Yorker, that was very
Yeah.
important to me to shoot that. I was actually outside of the city when the planes hit. And actually, I remember my wife calling me up and she said, run to the TV, go to the TV. And I was down in my office. I ran to the TV, and obviously, I was watching the impact of the first plane
Yeah.
hitting. And then, miraculously, the second plane hit. I immediately called up my agents to find out where we were going, what was going on. But they had, after that, sealed off the city. There was no way into the city at that point. They knew we had a major emergency going on. And I was trying to figure out how to get in. I couldn't get in actually until the next morning because I had heard that they'd opened up one point on the Hutchinson Parkway, and using my press credentials, I was able to get in and get down to the site. The other thing that most people don't understand is that Giuliani, who everybody puts as this god for
Yeah.
taking care of the situation, actually decided that the press could no longer go down to Ground Zero. Every image that you saw come out of Ground Zero was people like myself who had to sneak in, hide their press credentials, hide their cameras, and hopefully not become either arrested or their cameras confiscated. The insidiousness of that is that, we have a Bill of Rights which has something called the freedom of press, and think of it in terms of what is going on. September 11th changed the way the world functions. Everything after September 11th was different.
Yeah.
And
I
will
agree.
remain so. We're seeing it with the aftermath of what we're seeing in terms of terrorist attacks now in Europe. Can you imagine if somebody called you up and said, hey, 2 planes just crashed into, the trade centers, they fell down? Would you believe that? No. What do you have ultimately? You have what? The photographs, the video. They become the evidence. They become the witness that says this happened. So as we look at our democracy and we try to understand the importance of the press and what it does, it's been often called the first draft of history, journalism, and I would really strongly agree with that. Getting that access is important for how we understand what is going on in the world and how we make our decisions about what we do in our lives. So on that level, we have to see it. Now, once I got down there and realized that you could not get in, the way they had set it up is 14th Street was a barrier which stopped all of the public. Press could go down further. But literally, before you got to Ground Zero, they were cordoning off an area, and they just dumped all the press in there and said, stay here. Well, that was ridiculous. I spent most of the first day not doing much of anything other than shooting from the periphery. What happened that night, I could take advantage both of the darkness and the chaos, and I was able to sneak in and start to get some of the pictures that, I'm going to show you now. In fact, I got in and I got to this picture here. And what I realized at that point, and I think what all of us realized at that point, was that there were not going to be any survivors. That what we were witnessing was a mass grave site. You didn't see people in the debris. You didn't see like a desk. You saw dust and just crushed, compressed pieces of concrete and steel. There was no way anyone was going to come out of that. So that was a different mindset in terms of what my job was.
How were
as
you
a
able to
journalist.
separate that? Like, as a New Yorker, going in there and seeing where you came from, like, what happened to those people?
Well, I don't think we disconnect emotionally, but I think what has to happen is that we have to flip that switch and say, okay, I'm a professional now. I have a job to do, and my job is to document what's in front of me and do it in a way that I can present it so that people who see my images can have an understanding of what is going on.
Oh, I understand that. Makes more sense.
The problem kept happening, though, is that you can't work freely because every time you're trying to work, you have to be looking over your shoulder, not that you're going to get hurt, but that a police officer is going to arrest you or take your cameras away. Now, think of what that means in terms of who we are as a country and what we do. Okay, so as you start looking through the pictures, this picture right here, right after I took this picture on another night, I was pulled down from behind and roughed up more than a little by a police officer.
Wow.
And I was screaming at him, "Why are you doing this? Go do your job. Let me do my job." Now, these are things that should not happen in a free society. I don't think that there's an understanding, but I think what we have is a landscape of how people see the news and the value that we represent and can create, how important that is, you know? Because I think one of the things you have to realize as you do this work, we have a responsibility, and that responsibility is always the truth.
Thank you. Do you have any like photographs that you have taken that have like set like a memory that like left an impact on you?
Well, again, I think this gets back to what we were talking about before. At this point, I probably have about 300,000 slides and then 10 years of digital work in assignments done all over the world. So I don't know. You know, I think what it is that each story has its own pictures that are connected to me. Like the picture, this one here, of which I shot early morning. In fact, I remember one photo editor at a magazine was mad at me. He said, "Rick, you made it look too beautiful." And I was kind of pissed off at that, to be honest with you. I must say. I was saying, like, no, I think you're mistaking how I visually compose with a perception of what you define as beauty.
Yeah.
You know, and my goal still, and I think all of us as media people, whether you're a videographer, photographer, whatever, is to make the best image we can.
Of course.
Just a segue from 9/11, what kinds of things are you doing now, present day?
Well, I thought I would talk a little bit about the organization which I created, which is called Vision Project.
Okay.
And let me just get there for a second. The reason I created Vision Project is because I saw that there was a transition of how the business of news was working. And what I mean by that, a number of things are happening. We had at that time the digital world ushering in. The internet was beginning to have an impact that was changing the way we get information. And also the ability to have a career as a photojournalist was changing. You had a couple of major players, Getty and Corbis, which decided that they were going to take control of the kind of magazine world or the photojournalist world. And what they were doing or starting to do at the time was to figure out how they were going to go about doing that. Now, remember that both of them are backed up by tremendously deep pockets of money. Corbis has Bill Gates on one side, Getty is Getty Oil. And what they decided to do is they were just going to buy up everybody. The way news worked, particularly photojournalism at the time, is there were the individual agencies that represented photographers that then worked with the magazines and created content and then distributed that content. What they tried to do was to buy up all of them and consolidate where that information flowed out from in order to control the marketplace. And they started to do that. And they did it in the beginning by being able to lose more money than everyone else. I mean, they were both losing about 20 to 25 million a year trying to consolidate that market base. And if you think of it, Black Star, as powerful and as viable as we were, can't afford to lose $1 million a year, let alone 25. So what they would do is they would create all kinds of predatory approaches to the business, making images available for nothing or very little money, getting young photographers in, and then in the contracts having them sign the fact that they were giving up their copyright, even though they probably didn't know that was happening. And this went on for a period of time. So when they weakened an agency, then they would either swoop in and buy them, or they would put them out of business.
Oh, wow.
To this day, they really now have control of the market. I think both of them have control of about 150 million to 200 million images, which they
Wow, that's crazy.
control the flow of. After they did that, then they've gone to the major players like Time Warner and worked out distribution deals, which their photographers cover the assignments or the events or whatever. And when that happened, I realized, well, this is a major change, and how am I going to work in this environment? Because
Yeah.
I did not like what was going on, and I decided to create Vision Project. I looked at how I was going to do that from two perspectives. I could have set it up as a photo agency, but then I would have them come after me. And I then thought, like, well, how am I going to generate revenue to do the content? And I thought if I set it up as a not-for-profit, then one, I could go after corporate contributions and I can go to foundation support.
Yep.
That would give me the freedom to create content until I thought it was done. And then also, more importantly, maintain the control of how that content was used and looked. Because often upon publication, you would sometimes grieve. You know,
Yeah.
you spent a lot of time with a story. You wanted these pictures used. You know, three other people are deciding what the pictures are or how the text is going to work,
Yeah.
and you lose control. Everything we do now, I have complete control.
Oh, that's great.
And when we started thinking this is only going to be about photography and the traditional approach of photography and text, and we created Witness Magazine. And I thought I'd show you a couple of the covers in terms of the content that we do. These are large, in-depth stories that really submerge themselves into the situation, the people, what is going on. And then it's a collaborative effort between myself, who's the chief editor, and the journalists who are working with me. It's not like, thanks guys, give me your stuff and go. I mean, I really spend a lot of time with people that I really trust investigating a story and getting it done right. So that was one component. What also started to happen is that with the change in terms of the technology, right, now it's multimedia.
Yeah.
What we realize is with our computers, this is our darkroom, our editing room, everything could happen here. And it gave us an ability to do things that we couldn't do before. On the other hand, it made sure that we had to learn all that other stuff in order to integrate it into what we're doing. From that, we moved into multimedia.
Yeah.
We moved into full-blown documentary film. And I thought, a couple of things I wanted to show you in terms of how we approach something. And I thought I would talk a little bit about crossroads if you wanted. We decide on an image not necessarily what's happening in the news, but what is an important issue that affects many people related to the news. And Vision Project's approach to rural healthcare is an example of that. We were looking at that time for a story, and we were looking at healthcare because it was a major issue at the time. We were looking all over. We were looking at urban situations, rural, what have you. We discovered in the Mississippi Delta area, issues related to rural healthcare were not only different, but needed different ways to address dealing with how people get healthcare. And what we decided on doing is focusing on those components and put it together in a way that not only moves that this is what happens, but becomes a form of resolution. Because Vision Project is really more defined as a kind of advocacy journalism rather than journalism, I guess, as it's more, referred to. Our goal is to take a subject, investigate it, look at it, but also then present the content in a way that people from that information can make decisions that help them resolve problems where they are. And this is an interesting situation because what we discovered in the process of doing this story is that they had created a network for addressing rural healthcare that can be used anywhere else in the country. Yes, you might tweak it to your individual local needs, but the structural elements were all going to be the same. So what we started to do is after we shot it as a still with text for the magazine, I realized, I got to do this in video. I went back to New York, got my video team, went down, and we shot it as a film. And now we put it on 2 platforms because my audience now can see it in the traditional mode of magazine story, or they can look at it as a full-blown documentary. And as we go forward with Vision Project, we take that approach on a lot of levels. We look at a subject not only in terms of its content, but also how we can present that content so people can get access to the information.
Got it.
That's awesome. You've also written a few books. Tell us about how you went through the process of getting those books published and getting those out there.
Getting those books published, particularly now, is painful.
Really?
And the reason is because the print world, unfortunately, is dying. I
Yep.
mean, we're in a different place. I think this generation gets their information through the internet, online. It's so expensive to produce these books if you want high quality content and reproduction. Usually, the way it was done was that obviously, if you had your agent, you were working through your agent. You needed to find a publisher, you needed to work out contractual things, and then you needed to control that. That usually happens over a period of years. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen, oh, here's an idea, let's do it. And that's the rare situation. What I've done now and what I'm doing now at Vision Project, in addition to doing hard copy print books, we have created ebooks. And we are now moving in that mode. And we have at the site 2 ebooks, and we will do more of them. One, I think there's not only a market for them, but also it's kind of how people want to do things.
Yeah.
You know, again, that gives us the ability to create this content for less money than if I need to make a hard copy print.
Okay. So obviously now you're a professor at Sacred Heart. What kind of got you into being a professor? And
Well, I think I'm a bit older now, and I can't be running around as much as I like. But the way I came to Sacred Heart is that Professor Castengate became aware of Vision Project and asked me to come here and give a presentation. And he is such a great human being, and quite honestly, a visionary. We hit it off so well. He said, "Rick, would you be interested in teaching a class here?" I said yes. That began a process. We started to connect. He asked me to teach another class here. And at that time, he was seriously thinking about creating a graduate program here at the university. And we'd been talking about how we were going to interconnect things that we're doing at Vision Project with the educational programs here, and they kind of came together. And now I'm here, obviously, as a professor and teaching both on the undergrad and the graduate level. And I enjoy that because I think now my hope is that I can plant seeds in you, the students, in a way that might inspire you to take this path of journalism and use the tools that are available at the university to, you know, get your craft to the place of excellence where you can go out and start creating content for yourselves.
yeah, we really appreciate the insights. What is your favorite and least favorite aspects of being a professor, you'd say?
So you have to be careful so I don't get in trouble.
Just say your favorite if you want to.
My favorite is the students.
Oh.
I truly enjoy the interaction, particularly with students who I find are really interested and want to learn. I think the thing that I like least is the slower process of academia that is so different for me than the professional world.
Yeah.
In the professional world, it's like when we're doing it, go,
Right there.
we're doing it. The process here is much different, and it's taken me quite a while to adjust.
All right.
Well, we like to go back to the side of your photojournalism. So, what paths can a photojournalist take in order to get started in the field and, you know, be a very good photojournalist at that?
Sure. Well, first thing, you need to really develop your craft where you understand how to use the tools. Okay? So you need to have good skills with your camera. You certainly need the software now because our darkroom is now our computers. Once you do that, you have to move to the next level. It's no longer, do I just take a picture? In fact, in my classes, I joke all the time, anybody can take a picture. I call the new cameras PhD cameras. Push here dummy, right? They're autofocus, they're auto everything. You don't have to think. You still have to think. And you have to find a way to connect content to composition. And these are the components that make for great photographs. Once you've mastered your craft, then you have to figure out how I'm going to plug in to this network of the business to have a career. Now, before, the way it was done was you usually used to drop yourself into a conflict zone, take some pictures, and hopefully find a magazine to publish something and then get an agent. That business model doesn't work anymore. In fact, it's almost obsolete. But what is happening? I think you have to then figure out what is the network in which this content moves and how do I plug into that. Now, on the side of the photojournalist, which is only doing photography, one, I think that's limited because we are no longer photojournalists anymore. We're kind of digital journalists.
Right.
The expectation is that I'm going to shoot stills, I'm going to shoot video, I'm going to edit it, I'm going to write it, and I'm going to put it in 3 or 4 different formats depending on what my client or my employer wants me to do. So you move in a different world. Okay? Once you plug into that, then you have to look at what is going on in the industry. I think what we're seeing is where before it was like I wanted to work with the magazines at the top of things. The magazines don't really have an impact anymore, particularly the weeklies, of which are finished. But there's a bunch of online organizations that are really at the forefront of what's going on. You know, Vice, Global Post, VP, I think, is one of us. We're trying to do that. There are many others out there. How do you plug into that? How do you plug into the more traditional ones? You know, whether it's the news broadcast stations or, you know, the New York Times, Washington Post. How do I get access to get in that door to start my career? And those are the ways in which I think you need to develop how you're going to go forward in terms of turning what your love is into terms of something that can give you a career.
So if you had to do it all over again, would you definitely take the same career path and choose photojournalism, or was there anything else that you aspired to do as you were growing up?
Well, when I was growing up, I wanted to play in a band and do rock and roll. So
Oh, no, you had to outgrow that.
Right. But I think what has happened is because you have to look at the time periods. When I came into photojournalism way back, the way you approached it and went in was different than what you would do now. I think what I enjoy most now is the technology has allowed me to not think just as a photojournalist. I mean, I think as much as being a director for a film or a multimedia producer than I do as going out and doing stills for a magazine. So I love the ability to be able to go back and forth between them. In addition to that, bringing that content or bringing that to my classrooms where I can exchange and show and teach and, you know, connect all of that to my students.
So you definitely condoning the idea of everything being on the internet because, you know, you hear some older people who have already been in the game say, you know, they think the internet is more so brainwashing us and stuff. So you think it's an easier path to take for everything being on the
No,
internet?
I don't think it's an easier path because you bring up an important point. I think most of what's on the internet is garbage. Okay, and I think we have to be very careful and very mindful how we get our information. What are our sources? I mean, the other important component of Vision Project, and one that I maintain absolutely, is where I value truth and the integrity of the piece. Unfortunately, too often what we get on the internet, well, who knows who created it? Who knows how honest it is or how truthful it is? You know, journalism has to be based on facts. Okay, it's not just because you have an opinion means something. Everybody has an opinion, and that's great. Everybody can have an opinion. But if I'm going someplace to get information to make decisions about my life, I want it to be based on factual information that isn't twisted or turned. I mean, we see it even today in our TV news with the polarization of what has happened to our news, right? Where before, you know, you went there to get information. Unfortunately, it's so polarized that most people go to news organizations now not to get information, but to get information that is what they want to hear or believe. That's a real threat to our democracy.
Okay, so one last piece of advice for our viewers. What would you like to say?
I think I can only say, for the students to work hard in developing your craft and look at journalism as an excuse to explore your world, because that's the great thing I've got from it. I couldn't sit behind a desk 9 to 5. It was always an excuse to explore something, and that's what I would
That's awesome.
like to leave with.
Thank you for joining us today on Media Matrix. Special thanks to Professor Falco. This is Tykira, Lydia, Mary, and Alex signing off.